It's been 13 years. Final Fantasy VII remains at the top of many people's favorite games list for many reasons. Well, it's not at the top of mine, and that's with a truly impartial playthrough even today. Over the years, I've grown to hate the game due to the excessive fandom surrounding it, in much the same way I despise Star Wars, where in the absence of anything but glowing praise, all the wrath of heaven would be incurred upon you. About a year ago, IGN.com questioned if the title truly is overrated. It was the second in a series following The Legend of Zelda and Ocarina of Time. My favorite happens to be The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, I wanted to truly feel as if I'd recently connected with the story. So I popped it in the PlayStation 2 and let the experiment begin. After all, I had to give it a shot in order to give it a legitimate review. This is part 2 in my retrospective counting down from least favorite to favorite Final Fantasy game. There was the Flower Girl, just as when I'd loaded it so many times before. The train, the familiar logo, then the date, 1997. I thought to myself, man, I was in junior high when this was released. I can't believe it's been that long ago. I must be getting old. As the game started in earnest, I started plodding along through the story, stealing superb items long before they were available to buy, mastering materia, and growing my limit breaks. I took my time trying to truly immerse myself in this fantasy world. I'd never had the patience to do this when I was younger. After a while, I fell into a bit of a doldrum. Once again, I was clicking away at all the text like someone who truly knew the story, which I did. Because of that, I even made a stupid mistake and didn't play the piano during the Nibelheim flashback and missed out on Tifa's level 4 limit break. Of course, I didn't realize that until I'd gotten there to try. I took some time to grind out a few levels, getting high enough to survive beta and learn it as an enemy skill, and that made me pretty much unbeatable for the rest of the first disc. At long last, I'd made it to my favorite part of the game. For me, that's the period of time from catching the Chocobo all the way to Rocket Town. There's always been something about the music in the Coral Mountains that puts me at ease with the world. I probably had a moment of bliss as a teenager while I was traipsing about in the area. I really don't remember. You know, it's one of those life can't get any better type moments you have whenever you're young and responsibility free. On a side note, I got my college degree in journalism. I knew that when I was younger there were a few typos in the game, but I never realized quite how many. I've pretty much become a grammar Nazi since then. It's so bad, in fact, that I've even yelled at people for committing simple literary faux pas, like I and me, who and that, and using incorrect tenses, which the game also does in certain places. But I never quite realized exactly how many typos there are in Final Fantasy VII. Simple things, like unnecessary capitalization of words like rocket, or buggy, or materia. I understand the concept of proper nouns, like all materia, and you capitalize those, but it's almost as if the Sony localization team way back in 1996 hired a team of illegal immigrants to interpret the Japanese text. Where the rocket Shinra number 12 should be capitalized, rocket should not, nor should monster in the battle square, although the battle square is a proper noun. Hell, the localization couldn't even keep up with the words that they'd unnecessarily capitalize from one time to the next. One time it would be capitalized, the next it wouldn't be. Also, there's a lot of missed punctuation, not just commas, which a lot of people can lose track of, but even at the end of sentences. Where the heck are the periods, Sony? Not to mention spacing issues, excessive punctuation, and sentences that break in the middle and start on a new line when there's enough space on the previous line to continue. It was mind-bogglingly bad. That got me down. I didn't play for a while. I was away from the game for at least a week. When I got back to it, I did a bit more grinding. I wanted to get Aerith's level 4 limit break before I lost her, even though the only time I got to use it was in the battle against the Demon Wall in the Cetra Temple. This time around, I trudged my way through the Great Glacier, completely clearing every item in the area, and then made it to Holzoff without collapsing. When I got to the top of Gaia's Cliffs, the wrong CG loaded. I got the video of the high wind leaving the crater and the weapons popping out of the ground. And the CG didn't even finish. It just stopped as the Sapphire weapon exploded through the ground. By the time I'd gotten to the end of the crater events, it was almost as if the disc was loading the wrong CGs based on some numerical order, which had gotten off track at the beginning of the disc. To me, it makes more sense to load a cinema scene based on some kind of coding to prevent this kind of thing from happening, instead of loading Cinema 1, Cinema 2, then Cinema 3. And that messed things up. Barrett didn't show Tifa how Meteor was on its Dr. Strangelove-esque bat out of hell course for the planet. The metal curtains opened up, then nothing. Luckily, I got to progress the story without seeing the CG. Then the game glitched when the Shinra tried to blow the hell out of Sapphire Weapon. I stopped playing for a while, thinking my review process was shot. After all, even digital data wears out. I just thought it would take longer than this. It was almost as if a reset was what it took to get the numerical order out of the downward spiral it was going through. To me, at least, the game gets incredibly boring during Disc 2. Very depressing, completely. I understand that the storytellers were trying to adequately convey the plight of the world, but I felt as if Meteor just needed to fall and put everyone out of their misery just so they'd shut the hell up! The game picks up when you get Cloud out of his hangover. the rocket launch is fun. So is the invasion of Midgard, which I milked for everything it was worth. But just as my interest returned, the game was essentially over. So like I said, I did a few things I'd never had the patience to do before. Get a gold chocobo, convert as much materia as I could into master form, level cap everyone, and beat both ruby and emerald weapons. And emerald still took me 5 times. Damned Airtam Storm. I spent a good 10 hours grinding movers and magic pots in the northern crater with Cloud's Apocalypse and Sid's Scimitar in all of their triple ability point glory. And the AP these guys drop per battle is pretty damned awesome too. By the time I beat the weapons, I was too bored to beat Sephiroth, who is a total pushover. But I did it anyway. I simply mimed Knights of the Round so many times that I didn't have to fight him. I cooked dinner during the fight, then watched Advent Children. As much as I felt Ash was the main character in Final Fantasy XII, yet you controlled Vaughn, I felt the hero of Final Fantasy VII was Aeris. Cloud simply followed Sephiroth where Reunion commanded him to go without question. Then, after you regain use of him, his motivation changes to no longer wanting to be a slave, to the feeling that he needed to be with Sephiroth, to needing to get rid of the aforementioned feeling. All of his feelings were based on some misplaced vengeance and his own burgeoning homosexuality. Barrett was fighting for Marlene and all of the children and future generations of the world. Sid was a scientist and wanted to keep on learning. He couldn't bear the apocalypse happening on his watch, and Tifa was doing it for her friends. Other than that, the rest of the cast had a total lack of motivation. Vincent also wanted vengeance, which he got by killing Hojo. Red 13 was doing it because he was the last of his tribe, so he had a what the hell, the species is extinct anyway kind of moment, even though his singularity proved to be false somehow. Reeve's ambitions were never explained, and Yuffie was simply too materialistic to care. I understand the character flaws are what draw you to characters in the first place, because you're actually able to see a bit of yourself in them. But I felt so many members of the cast were irredeemable. I felt more connection to characters like the Turks and members of the Shinra cabinet than many of the main characters. And you barely see these guys throughout the course of the game. Barrett's story gets fleshed out earlier on the disc, culminating with getting to the Gold Saucer prison and explaining his story with dying. And Red 13's story ends in the Geek Cave. Their stories do get explained, but they happen too early in the story. It does take a while to get to Cloud and Tifa's story conclusion in the live stream, which is fairly satisfying. Then Sid and the Rocket, including his speech about sleeping through Loveless. That's also satisfying. Besides these characters, there's little to no personal growth in the rest of the cast. It shouldn't have taken Dirge of Cerberus to flesh out Vincent's story. Yuffie and Cait Sith were entirely neglected, with the exception of a few sparse lines about who they are, which still reveal little about their characters. Finally, the motivation at the beginning of the game to destroy Shinra simply never made sense to me. I understand that the events of Crisis Core said Avalanche was much more militant than when Barrett took over, something the character echoes in the prison sequence. But I kept wondering why fans of the game identify with Avalanche, especially when so many people died during the destruction of the #1 reactor, even though the organization was much more peaceful at the time than it was at its inception. As altruistic as organizations like Greenpeace are, eco-terrorism isn't the way to go about being heard. While society on the whole agrees that whaling is bad, Greenpeace uses piracy to attack ships. They are just as culpable for their actions as the whalers themselves. You lobby your congressman. You hold benefit dinners. You gather to peacefully demonstrate. And if all that fails, you run for Congress yourself and work as hard as you damn well can to get what you want. Even though there was no legitimate government in this world, the same premise holds true. Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. taught us that nonviolent resistance does work. So should we side with the Shinra? Not at all. We're seeing today in our economy what happens when you trust big business. They crush your economy through the greed and misdirected ideas. Not to mention that, but Shinra, in dropping the plate, reacted much as the same way the federal government did during Waco, Texas. The Shinra company was making an example of Avalanche. You act, we retaliate in a much bigger way. Two wrongs don't make a right. My opinion of the game didn't change much. It will probably go up a little bit in the ratings after this series is done. Still, it's a pretty average story, a pretty average villain. I still didn't feel that Cloud had legitimate reason to be the hero. None of his motivations were heroic enough for me. But then, there's only one lie, and Sephiroth is no Kefka, who actually did destroy the world and not just try. Sephiroth, you are a bitch. You got your ass handed to you by a drag queen, an amputee, a porn star, a tween, a dead guy, an alcoholic, and a puppy dog and a kitty cat. You bitch. So the rating goes down like this. Gameplay, 7. Story, 6. It factor, 4. Total, 17.